Hey, welcome to Creative Block. I'm your host, V, and Gene is usually here, but today he's off out and about doing some Q bomb stuff. We interview people in creative industries about their life, work, and hobbies while we doodle jam. We asked people on Twitter if they had specific topics they wanted us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts. And today we have Vaughn Ross. Hi.
Hello, thank you for having me, V. Big fan of the show.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited to have you on the show because you've worked at Lucasfilm. We've never had anyone on the show who worked at Lucasfilm. And you've done storyboards, you've done directing, you've been a supervising director. So we have a ton to talk about that I'm really excited about.
I'm excited
But
too.
let's start with your life
Oh,
story.
oh my.
When you where did you always know you wanted to go into animation, or how did you kind of stumble onto that path?
I was one of these weird kids that always knew I wanted to be in animation.
Oh, nice.
Ever since I was, I can remember my mom took me to Disneyland when I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6. And I think at that point I was like, I'm gonna work here. I didn't know what
Oh
that
yeah.
meant exactly, but and my sort of creative tastes changed over the years.
Mhm.
But from a very young age, I knew to I knew I wanted to work in animation, which was kind of a strange thing for a kid in,
Oh, that's
at that age, you know.
that's really
But
cool though. Like knowing that the industry was there, or like that was like a possibility for you to like go towards. And do you like what was for you the career like trajectory in terms of like I'm gonna go to college, or how did you know what to do to kind of like
I didn't know anything about an industry or anything like that. I just knew I wanted to work in it. And so I remember when I was in high school, deciding what I was going to do getting out of high school. I was like, okay, I'm just going to go to art college because I know I need to know how to draw better, right? I mean, I was always an
Mhm.
artist, but I knew I needed to get that skill up. And I went to art school. I went to the art academy in San Francisco,
Mhm.
and at the time, they didn't even have an animation department. So I was going to school for illustration because they had a
Oh.
really, really good illustration department. And, and actually while I was there, they started an animation department. And I remember being really excited about that, right? Because I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. So they started this new department. And I took a couple classes and it became kind of clear to me that, like, oh, you guys are figuring out how to start an animation department. And I'm paying a lot of money to take these classes. So
Uh-huh.
I quickly dropped those classes and just stuck with illustration because I was like, okay, they know what they're doing with the illustration department, and I don't
Mhm.
want to pay to be a guinea pig.
Yeah,
Um,
that's smart actually. I feel like, yeah, that's really smart to make that decision because I don't know. I feel like sometimes when people go to school, like, you just do the classes and you don't kind of question what's going on.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also because I was working part time,
Oh yeah, what were you
while
doing?
I was waiting tables, while I was going to
Nice.
school, paying, I was paying, I was, in debt with loans and paying my own rent, paying my own bills and
Mm.
whatnot. So it wasn't, I feel like I was very aware of every dollar I was spending because of that. So,
Right. Yeah.
where, some kids didn't have that experience, right? Some kids were like, oh,
Hmm.
I got a scholarship or my parents are paying for it. It's a little bit different, right?
Hmm.
So I think because of that, it kind of, it made me very hyper aware of like every penny that was being spent. And, I mean, I
Yeah.
even did a thing where I would I would register for like 3 more classes than I knew I was going to take,
Oh, interesting.
so that I could start the semester off and like because if you wanted to drop any classes, you could drop classes within the first 3 weeks without any kind of penalty. And so that
Oh, interesting.
and so that
Okay.
first 3 weeks, I would just be really paying attention to my instructors and trying to figure out, okay, does this guy or girl really know what they're talking about? Is he or she gonna be a really good teacher? Because I
Mm,
got burned a couple times on a couple classes early on. And
right.
by doing that, I ended up getting really good instructors because I was able to kind of like weed out the ones that weren't weren't up to what I felt I was willing to pay for at the time. So yeah,
College, what's the word? Like life hacks, like
yeah,
college hacks.
yeah,
Everyone.
yeah. Exactly. I don't know if they've gotten hip to that now and won't allow it, but that was a good little trick that I think worked out for me in the end.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. 'Cause then you could just like really focus on the classes that were gonna pay off.
Right. Because there's nothing more disheartening than paying like thousands of dollars and feeling like this class isn't doing anything for me?
Right, yeah,
So,
because you're not only wasting your money, but you're also wasting your time. So it's
right,
like, oof,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. Oh, cool. What kind of so you said illustration classes. It was an illustration major.
hmm
Kind of what was the name of the different classes that you took within that major?
What were the classes? I took like, a lot of figure drawing classes, tons and tons of figure drawing classes. That was
Mm,
just like the foundation, which I
yes.
thought was, in retrospect, I felt like really paid off for me as far as in animation. Um,
Yes.
Painting, like oil painting, watercolor, perspective, all those sort of foundational stuff.
Mm.
Um,
That's
uh,
really interesting because then you went on to become a storyboard artist
mhm.
and like I guess do you feel like painting kind of helped you with composition and layout and that kind of stuff?
I do,
Like, 'cause
I do actually, and one thing, I think my experience in illustration really helped me out in my career because I remember like we all know, animation industry kind of goes through ebbs and flows and
hmm
highs and lows. And at one moment there's like tons of work and you're like turning stuff down, and then there could be like, a lull. And I remember there was, we were going through this sort of lull of like work, especially in the Bay Area, because there's a lot less of it than say in LA. It was like
hmm
after the sort of .com crash, right? And
mm,
because I had an illustration background, I felt like I was much more sort of versatile in the kind of work that I could do.
yeah.
Whereas like some of the folks that just had purely like animation background uh, found it harder to find work because I was able to get like spot illustration work. I was able to do storyboards for like ad agencies and stuff, which a lot of
Right.
times
Yeah.
those are a lot more like illustrative than
True.
than what you you
hmm
know than what you do in like television or film. Um, so yeah, so I felt like it made me a lot more versatile in the types of jobs that I could pick up, because I had
Yeah.
I had that experience um, or that skill.
Do
Um,
you do you feel like when you did you actually start in illustration or like storyboarding for ad agencies, or did you get your first gig in animation? Like, what was the first job that you got after college?
my first job, actually
Like
my
in the
first,
art industry, I guess.
yeah, well, actually my first art, well, not my first job, I was in school still.
hmm
And so actually one of my first jobs was like I was working for this this art company in the Bay Area called Funky Fat Productions or something like that. And basically they did album covers for like all these like Bay Area artists like E40 and all these, sort of different Bay Area artists. And so I was like the in-house illustrator, and I would like draw like logos if they needed like a fully illustrated album cover. I'd be the guy that they would come to for that. So that was kind of like, my sort of first sort of art job. And then while I was working there, and I was in school, I ended up getting an internship at Twitching Image on James and the Giant Peach.
Oh, cool.
So that was like my first that was my first animation gig, was an internship on James and the Giant Peach. And I was interning in the story department with
very cool.
with like, Joe Ramft, who is like a legendary storyboard artist guy who's, RIP. And a bunch of guys, and at the time I didn't even know who these guys were, I was just so happy to be there and so happy to be like kind of part of it. And it was kind of a funny story about how I actually got that gig. Was I, basically, pestered them and was like, I want to work here. I want an internship here. And they just, they kept turning me away. And then finally they were like, okay, fine.
Okay,
Fine.
Who were you pestering? Was it like a recruiter? What was the
just the guy at the door? Just the guy. The receptionist, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. And it was actually me and my girlfriend at the time. We're both trying to get in here, and then she was actually the first one to get in with the pestering.
With the pestering.
Yeah. So anybody out there looking to get into, don't underestimate the art of pestering and being resilient in what you want. Yeah. But yeah. So then, but it was an amazing experience, because I think at that time, that was a point where, like you were saying, like, how did I know at a young age that I wanted to be in the industry and all that? I really didn't. I just knew I wanted to make cartoons, right?
Yeah.
But this was the moment where it was like, it became clear to me, like, oh, this is a real job that people have, and especially at Twitching Image, because it was a stop motion studio. There was there was so many different job sort of people doing different things, right? There was like the fabrication department, there was a story department, there were animators, there were, it was just, it went from, in my mind at the time, being like this, this fantasy sort of job, right? That I'd love to have one day, but kind of felt a little bit out of reach and a little bit abstract, to like, wow, this is a real thing that, like, not only are there jobs, but there's multiple disciplines, right? And I think at that point, because and like I said, I was still in school while I was doing this internship, and I kind of jumped the line a little bit, because I think I was like maybe a sophomore. And, and they, and the other thing is, like, once I started the internship, they were like, all right, well, just bring us your information from the college for, permission to do this, to do the internship. And of course the college wasn't going to give it to me, because I was only a sophomore. Right. And so every week I would just be like, oh, I forgot, I'll bring it next week. And I just kept, and by like the fourth week, they were like, yeah, whatever, forget it, Um,
Wow, what a little
so
scam.
yeah. So by that time they were, by that time they fell in love with me and they couldn't let me go. Right. So yeah. So, I mean, but that was the thing though. It was like, you know, on top of me sort of being persistent while I was there, I was like working my butt off. I was like
Mm.
working really hard. They knew they can count on me. They were, so, I think,
What kind of so you were doing storyboards at that time
I
during
was
that
I was an
internship?
internship in the storyboard department. So one of the bigger tasks that I had was they had like these sort of storyboard folders
Mm.
that had to be updated
Mm-hmm.
as the storyboard as the story team was developing the story. And so I would take those binders and I would have to update the binders in all the other different departments, which was
Oh, I see.
which was
Mm-hmm.
great because then I got to see all the other different aspects of the studio and kind of see how it all kind of worked together,
Right.
which
Yeah.
was
So
really
you were almost
fascinating.
kind of, yeah, you were almost kind of like a story PA, kind of.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, so I would go down and, hang out with the guys in fabrication who were like, getting high with their hot glue guns, making giant pirate ships and out of popsicle sticks and, you know, uh,
That's so cool.
as well as like the CG department, who are doing all the effects with the, SGI machines at the time. They were the big fancy
Mm-hmm.
machines back then. So yeah, I did that. And then when that gig ended, uh, the internship ended, they needed people to do, they needed people to do, 2D effects for the studio, for the
Mm.
movie. And so they hired me on to help out with that. And so, I helped out with like, shooting all the rough animation on like the lunchbox it was called at the time. It was like, you stick it, it was like under an actual camera, on paper, you put down the animation and shoot one frame at a time with like X sheets and all that. So I did that, and then they needed people to ink and paint it, right?
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I ended up moving on to that department where, we were doing, basically pushing paint on cell vinyl and
Mm. Mm-hmm.
painting, pushing the bubbles around
Mm.
to paint the special effects for the movie. And yeah, and then from yeah, and then it kind of just kind of, once I kind of got my foot in the door,
Yeah.
it just one thing kind of led to another from,
Mm.
working hard, making friends with people in the
Yeah.
industry. Because then the job that I had after that was, at this studio at the time called Colossal Pictures in the
Mm-hmm.
Bay. Is also set in the Bay Area, and they were famous for doing all the liquid television animation at the time. They did
Mm.
Eon Flux at the
Oh
time.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, so from there I got a job um, at Colossal in the ink and paint department.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I was, with these band of like, it was like 10 or 15 painters. And that was back when we were doing painting backgrounds with like gouache and acrylic for,
Wow.
animation productions and stuff. So I was helping out in that department. And
That's so crazy when I think about it. Like painting a background traditionally must be so much more high stakes than doing it digitally.
right, right.
Especially if you're
Yeah,
doing gouache, because gouache is like it's like really finicky. I don't
yeah,
know. You
yeah,
can't really mess up. Wow, that's so crazy. So yeah, so all the illustration
yeah.
degree paid off. Yeah,
Exactly.
for
Yeah,
real.
exactly, exactly.
Wow. Oh, that's so
So,
cool.
yeah. No, I do have a funny story about how I got that job, if you want to hear it.
Yes.
So they found out, they found out I found out about the gig because a lot of the people that were on James and the Giant Peach, um, doing the ink and paint stuff, they were from Colossal. And so they were like, hey, you could probably get a job, you know, with us over at Colossal. So I went down there, and I was like, hey, I'd like to apply for a job if you guys are hiring. And the woman was like, okay, well, I'm going to give you a test, and, basically I'm going to give you a piece of vinyl and some paint, and you
Mm-hmm.
can go to town on it, take this test. We're all going to go out for lunch, and when we come back, I'll check it out. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, all right, cool. And so she gives me the cell vinyl. I don't know if you remember, but do you remember those Coke commercials back in the day where it would be like a truck driving? It's like during Christmas time, it'd be like a truck, like a semi,
Oh.
and then Santa would be would on the back of the truck, and he's like like an animated Santa Claus. It was like ho ho ho, it was like
I don't think I've seen those because I wonder if they were also in France because it
right.
could also be like in the US.
Maybe
That's
it was around the
yeah.
same time when Coke had a bunch of these like penguin
Oh.
commercials for Coca-Cola. But anyway, so it was basically Santa Claus, animated Santa Claus on the back of a truck. It was like a live action commercial, but the illustration that was animated in sort of like that old school like line decker or
Mm-hmm.
sort of style. And so she left me with this, cell, and just like a shelf full of paint, but no example of what it was supposed to look like, you know?
Wow. Yeah,
And so,
that's so scary. Oh my
and
God.
so I was just like, all right, okay. And so, um, I'm sitting there with like this blank. It's worse than blank canvas, right? Because at least with blank, it's like white. But this is
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is vellum, so it's like it's not even white. It's just like see through. And so I'm
It's just
sitting,
shiny. It's just like
yeah,
reflecting random
right,
things.
right. I'm just looking at the desk that I'm working at, right? And I'm looking and I'm like, okay. And so I just started working on it, and I'm working on it, and I finish it, and she comes back and she takes a look at it. And what I had done was, since she didn't give me instructions on how to what to paint it, I I made it a black Santa. And for the viewers who don't know, I'm African American artist, and so I painted a black Santa, and she came back and she looked at it, and she kind of looked at me with like a little bit of like a little funny face, a little
Oh.
scrunch in her nose, and she's like, you know what, you're hired. And I was like,
Oh.
awesome. And I was like, awesome. And I think at that point too, I felt like, at least in the Bay Area, like
Yeah.
the animation community is pretty small.
Mhm.
Um, and it's, a lot of sort of like misfits type folks, right?
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
felt like at that point, like I really felt like I had like kind of found my tribe,
Oh,
like
that's so sweet.
very, very sort of like-minded, like kooky
Yeah.
folks that, wanted to make beautiful art,
That's so sweet. I'm
So,
so glad you told this story. It's
yeah.
really cute. Wow.
Yeah. And then, I think from there, just one thing kind of led to another, but the crazy thing though is like all through this time, I'm still in school, mind you.
Oh yeah, that's
I'm
true. Yeah,
I'm
'cause
still in school. I'm
how
still
did
in
you
college.
how did you make that work?
Well, the funny thing was like, I remember when I was in college, I was kind of like, I was at the mind of like, I'm just gonna do this until like I can find a job, right?
Right. Mhm.
And then when I actually got a job in animation, especially working on James and the Giant Peach, at Scaling or at Twitching Image, um, it became clearer to me that like I need school, you know, because it
Oh,
was
okay.
like, because a lot of the classes I was like, why do I need this class? I'm going to be an anime. I'm going to be an animator. I don't need this class. And then, you know, like I remember one specific one was like we had a class called something form something. It was like this class where you like made stuff out of like foam core and hot glue and you know it was
Yeah,
one of
yeah.
those sort of like foundational things to get you familiar with different types of tools and stuff like. And I was like,
Oh, yeah.
I don't need this class. I'm gonna be an animator. And then I went to twitching image and I was like, oh shit, I do need this class. And I was like, oh shit, I need all these classes because all that working started to work, all that it just made me realize like what a what a tall mountain it was going to be to climb to even be, you know,
Yeah,
competitive or be able to hold down a job with so many talented people, and
yeah.
the people have been, people that I was sitting next to working next to had been working in their field for like 10 to 15 years plus, you know.
Right. Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so
Hmm.
of course they're going to be like way better than me. Of course they were going to be way more
Yeah.
skilled than me. They just had so much more time. And so it actually made me get way more focused in my schoolwork,
Do you
even though I
feel like
was.
at school like the level overall wasn't very competitive and you found that competitiveness when you started in the field?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think
Mm.
people there were some really talented people that I went to school with as well.
Mm.
But I think like I said, I was so much like
It was just
you
kind
know
of like
I
the end goal. You
I
were
would
like just so
yeah, I was so much in hustle mode,
right.
I was much more in hustle mode than I was in like school mode,
I see.
and I had,
Yeah.
and that's, and I feel like, I even I feel like I envy, a lot of my classmates that could just focus on school at the time, you know.
Oh yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
But that wasn't my experience. My experience was like, I need to eat. I need to, I need to pay my rent.
Yeah.
I got, and, and I need to like, and I only have so much money to make a go at this. So I gotta like, be very, strategic about my path.
Yeah.
And, and so, yeah. And so, I mean, even though I thought like, oh, once I get a job, I'm going to quit going to school and like quit spending all this money.
Mhm.
It just made me feel like, oh, wow, this is money well spent. And I, and
Yeah.
I, I need to do this, on top of going to school, and the only reason I stopped going, and this was like, I was going to school and working in animation for, I think about 3 years because I was going to school part time.
Yeah.
So it was going to take me longer to finish, but it wasn't until I got a directing opportunity that I
Ooh.
had to stop going to school because I just couldn't.
Yeah, it was
I
just
couldn't do both. Yeah, at that
that was
point.
too much. Yeah, yeah, that's too
Yeah,
much.
yeah. But
Where was
but yeah.
the directing opportunity and how did that come about?
It was at Wild Brain, which
Oh
was,
yeah.
yeah, it was at Wild Brain. It was when I know Wild Brain is in LA now, but it started in San Francisco. And yeah, because I worked there for about 4 years. That was sort of like where I learned a lot about, you know, being an animator and storyboard, everything. I feel like that's where I
Mm,
really got my education in animation was at Wild Brain, and I worked under really talented directors
mm.
and mentors that I'm really good friends with to this day, like Robert
Nice.
Valley and Ed
Oh
Bell and
yeah.
a bunch of guys like
Wow.
that.
What
Um,
shows? What shows were you on?
well, at the time, Wild Brain was more, we did more like commercials. and
Okay.
stuff. So we did like Coke Supermom, which was a big Robert Valley one. It was like this
Mm.
Supermom, this, comic books sort of styled Coke commercial. Um, I was like an animator for Ed Bell on this like Sprite Voltron ad with like hip hop rappers and Sprite. It was a pretty big deal at the time.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, the thing about working at WildBrain was really great was I feel like because it was a commercial house, we
Mm.
jumped styles like so quickly. And
Yeah, yeah.
once again, there's my illustration like background once again sort of paid off, right? Because I was able to like very quickly jump from, you know, Rice Krispies, you know,
Yeah,
elves
yeah.
to,
Yeah,
to like, a
yeah.
super wood block sort of stylized, bank ad to, so like it was kind of fun because like every 3 months would be like a whole new style,
Yeah.
you know?
How was the schedule like?
The schedule was pretty fast and furious, but it was like, it was, but it was good. I mean, at the time it was, I was young and hungry and I started off as like an assistant animator
Mm.
at the time there were several studios in the Bay Area that
Mm.
did similar work. One was not Passion Pictures, Curious Pictures. There was
Mm.
Colossal. There was Wild Brain. And so what we would do is, or what the productions would do, because this is all 2D animation, right? And
Mhm.
all drawn on paper, right? So
Mhm.
you needed to have like a body of, a crew of in-betweeners, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
that's how I got my start was doing in-betweening. And what the productions would do is they would communicate with all the different other studios and be like, hey, our job is about to end here at this date, and they would coordinate with the other studios. And so we would jump around from studio to studio, um, you know, doing, assistant animation work. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot during those years. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really cool. That's really cool that like you went into that. Also, you did just so much 2D animation. I feel like it's I don't know. I guess maybe Titmouse. You can animate in 2D at Titmouse nowadays,
Hmm.
but it's really hard to have these jobs now. Or I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they still exist in the Bay.
No, not really.
Yeah,
Not
not really.
really. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah,
think, yeah, once everything went 3D, it was kind of really
yeah,
sad. It was like you saw a lot of people who were like career assistants, they're really, really good at their trade. They're really good at their craft, but
yeah.
if you didn't sort of like change with the times, you're kind of
How did
like,
you adapt to 3D? Because you didn't learn 3D at all in school, right?
no. I took one 3D class in school. I think it was like was it Maya or SGI, something like that. And I hated it. Oh my
Oh
God.
yeah.
So, it was so awful. I was like, this is, ugh, you know. So actually where I learned 3D was, at Lucasfilm. So yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
How did you get into Lucasfilm? How was kind of like your jump from like your like Wild Brain? Was it did you go from Wild Brain to Lucas?
No, actually, in between Wildbrain and Lucas, I started my own animation studio, or
What?
not by myself,
Oh, okay.
with some partners. Um, and
Solo.
Robert Valley was the one who actually started it initially. Maverick Studios. It was called Maverick Studios,
What?
and yeah, so I did that for like 5 years or so.
Did you guys basically what was the intention behind creating your own studio? Because I know like a lot of of artists like my age or younger, like
Hmm.
we're gonna make it an animation studio and change the animation world.
Right. Yeah. It was something like that. Yeah. Not, it actually was like, we Maverick Studios, that started off as just like a co-op studio space,
Oh, that's really
where
interesting.
were a bunch of us who just wanted to work on our own projects. But then when studios wanted us to do work, we had a
Mm,
space and we could just do it from there. And like I said, like Robert Valley was actually the guy who started that off.
mm.
Um, and so then yeah, so it started off as just like a co-op where we would all work on our own sort of comic ideas, or
Mm.
prepare for Comic Con, and all that kind of stuff. But then when, like, say, Wild Brain would, like, have a commercial that they wanted, like, Robert to direct, we would just he would be like, okay, well, I have a crew
Mm-hmm.
already here, and so we would just you know do the job. Instead of going into Wild Brain and working, we would just work from our own studio for Wild Brain.
Right,
And then
right.
eventually, we just I think Robert left, and he went off to go do crazy work on gorillas or something,
Mm-hmm.
um, in Europe. And so we decided, okay, well, hey, let's incorporate and, like, make this like an official thing so that we can get bigger jobs, ourselves. And so then we did that, and we were doing like storyboards and development for features,
Oh wow,
and
that's so cool. What features did you do development for?
we did some development for this, for the it never got made, but it was for this property called Blockheads.
Oh
Um,
yeah?
yeah, and it was sort of like this sort of hip hop futuristic, you know, post-apocalyptic world thing. That was
That would have
really
been
cool.
cool.
That was really, really
Yeah,
cool.
that sounds really
Um,
cool.
and what else did we do? We did stuff for like National Geographic. We did a bunch of stuff. And I think, ultimately we ended up shutting it down because it was just really bad timing. Like, I have so much respect for, like, studios like Titmouse and stuff, because that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of like what we were
Trying to do.
aiming to be,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I think it was a lot of it was like timing,
Oh yeah.
because we were in business like right when, like, the dot-com bubble was like bursting, and all of a
I
sudden
see. I see.
it just got
Yeah.
really, really tough, and all the
Mm.
animation started going overseas. At one
Oh
point we were
fuck.
like
Yeah.
competing with, like people that were working for, like, half, their budget.
Yeah.
They were cutting our budgets like in half and whatnot. And so it just became kind of untenable. And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
yeah. And then my current wife now, was like, okay, time for you to get a real job. And so I was like, fine, I'll go to Lucasfilm. And then, no, and then, yeah, I was fortunate enough to get a gig there, because, like, a couple of the guys, actually some of the guys that worked at Mavericks,
Hmm.
were um at Lucasfilm. So yeah, I went for my interview there, and it was just like hanging out with
Oh yeah, with your
my buddy,
pals.
my pals. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
So yeah. So I mean, yeah,
Very cool.
um and so yeah, and so then I started working there, and that's when I got introduced to 3D. But we
Mm-hmm.
started off in 2D, doing 2D boards, and then they were like, okay, everything's going to be in 3D, and we were like, what? Um and I didn't love it at first. But I felt like, okay, well, if I'm doing this 3D, then it's going to allow me more
Yeah.
more time to be able to do my own stuff, and not be
Mm-hmm.
burnt out from drawing all day, because I'm not doing so much drawing
Yeah.
um at Lucasfilm. But but actually, it became like a really great sort of like film education for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I sort of compare it to like analogy I like to give is like sort of like animation, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when I came up in animation, everybody said like if you want to be a great animator like Glenn Keane or you know what I mean, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the 12 mass, the
Mm-hmm.
12 old men and all that shit. Um, you got to be like this like Leonardo da Vinci, like all the figure drawing and all that, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
then, I was hanging out with some buddies from Pixar, because Pixar's up here in the Bay Area too, so a
yeah.
lot of our
Mm-hmm.
paths. And some of my buddies who are like the most talented like animators, I'm looking at their drawings and I'm like, you don't drawing like Leonardo da Vinci, and it was like, oh, it's because that's not animation, and that's not what animation's about, right? Same thing with stop
Yeah.
motion animators. A lot of stop motion animators aren't the best draftsmen because it's not
Mm-hmm.
about drawing, it's about timing, right? It's about
Mm,
timing.
yep,
It's
yep.
like
Mm-hmm.
spacing, timing, you
Yeah,
know. And so I feel like it's a similar thing with story, right?
yeah.
With story,
Mm-hmm.
it's about shot composition. It's about,
Mm-hmm.
the rhythm and pacing of your boards and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I felt like when I was working in 3D, doing 3D boards, all of a sudden it just kind of took the whole drawing element out of the process and
Yeah.
made me not that, I mean, I love drawing boards or whatever, and I'm still doing it to this day, but going through those years, it was like an exercise of just purely focusing on filmmaking and like
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
shots and rhythm, and it wasn't about like this pretty drawing. Because sometimes, even with boards, right? If your drawing is pretty enough,
Yeah.
you can sell a shot with how well
Yes,
you draw it. And it
that
might,
is true.
and it might not be the best shot, right? It might not be the best shot for the scene. And a lot of times if you're
Yes.
working on a 3D show, it's not even gonna be on the screen at all. It's like, ultimately it's gonna be rendered in 3D and it's gonna be
Yeah.
a totally different thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, that was a really great education for me. And I don't know, I think as far as 3D boards go, I think it has its place, but I don't think it's an end all be all by any means. I
Yeah.
think with like feature boards, I think especially feature boards, I don't think 3D boarding is as much the way to go, because you're writing more than
Yeah.
you're actually, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
whereas like
It-
with television, you're kind of writing, but you're more executing what the script is, and being and giving information for like the layout department coming up next down the
yeah.
pipeline, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah,
Oh,
but okay,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it's true. I agree because like for people listening, like Vaughn and I worked on Wings of Fire together, and we were using Blender to storyboard, and I think it was really interesting to use that software because you get to really be in the scenes with the characters, and when it's like very action and very like action drama, I think it really has a strong place to have that camera that you can really push the shots with, especially because
Hmm.
you know that later that's kind of the shots that are going to be referenced by the overseas studio, whereas feature animation, it's like you said, it's more like it's almost just like writing visually. So
Hmm.
drawing is faster
Right,
than than placing a camera and the characters in the 3D space.
right.
But then it's kind of like all about the pipeline kind of um, perspective, I guess.
Right, right. And in feature you have a layout department that's like literally gonna
Yeah.
take your chicken scratch and like, have an actual DP that's gonna like basically kind of, you know, take it from scratch and like make it so much more better. Whereas
Yeah.
television, the production schedule is so much faster that the overseas studios don't have time. They just need to execute what you've given them in the boards, you know. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a little bit, there's a little bit of time for playing with them, but it's very little. So it's like if you can give them as much information as possible, then the moments that they actually do have to play and be creative, they can actually do it as opposed to like feeling like, oh
Yeah.
my God, I'm never going to get through my 80 shots I have to get through or something,
Just fixing all these mistakes, yeah, that are
Right,
coming from the boards.
right,
Totally.
right.
Do you feel like your experience, like having created a studio, an animation studio, and like working up through all these jobs made you more aware of kind of like the pipeline and what it's like working with an animation in an overseas studio?
Very, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I'm very sympathetic to production. I understand like what a difficult job they have, like, herding us artist cats around and like trying to get something done within a timeline and whatnot. And also the realizing like what an effect like a properly ran production has in the ultimate like um quality of the show,
hmm
you know?
Yeah.
It's like you really can't have one without the other, If you just leave it to us artists, we're just gonna like take forever to do everything and like I feel like we at least for me, I need to have uh you know
Yeah.
guidelines and it helps me be more productive. It helps me be more efficient with my time as well.
Yes.
Especially as as I get older, I have a family, I have like other things outside of my work that I need to give my attention. So,
hmm
having production ran well allows me to like, live my life but still do good work, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, I mean, ugh, having my own studio and like worrying about payroll and shit like that. It's like health insurance. It was like, oh my God.
It
I
must have
was,
been
I was just
crazy.
happy to just, yeah. So when I got to Lucasfilm, I was like, just give me a paycheck
Yeah.
and, give me my sequence and that's all I need to worry about. And it was the most beautiful experience at the time because I was kind of burnt out on running a studio by the time I got to Lucasfilm.
Yeah, that makes sense, honestly.
Yeah.
I can't believe. I mean, even for me, just like doing this podcast on the side is so small, but I'm like doing that on top of like
Yeah.
regular job. It feels like it's like, oh, it is a lot of work. Like just like getting people like scheduling and like and we have a producer who's helping, so it's like I'm
Right.
complaining
Well,
and it's
see.
not even as bad as what you
Right.
were.
Well, then you can. I'm sure you appreciate your producer, right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
would this it probably wouldn't get done if it wasn't for those folks.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Wow. So, what kind of let's see. Oh, we're like pretty good on time, but I do want to ask a little bit because I remember talking to you with like Lucasfilm and the transition with Disney and kind of what that looked like
Hmm.
um in terms of like the tools you were using
Hmm.
and like because you just started learning 3D and getting used to the 3D software like
Hmm.
2D boards. Kind of how was that transition like
Oh,
when you guys were.
to do board and from 2D to 3D.
Ye-
It was a little painful in the beginning, of course. There was definitely some people pushing back. I think at the time, because it was at Lucasfilm, it wasn't, it was basically George was like, this came from George. And he was like, this is the way he wanted to do it.
Mhm.
And at the time, the software wasn't like super stable. And so a lot of people were like trying to like wanted to use Maya instead because Maya was more stable and people knew it better and whatnot. But he kind of like stuck to his guns and was like, no, you have to use our proprietary software.
Mhm.
And it was, it was great. I mean, it's like the sort of the process that we use that, that sort of I was sort of implementing on Wings of Fire on our show is much more of a live action sort of methodology
Mhm.
in way of working, where, you have your stage and you have your actors and you stage them out in this 3D environment and then drop in your cameras and shoot, right?
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
a lot of the creative work is happening in editorial as well, and so
Mhm.
there's a lot more back and forth from editorial to story than there is in usual
Mhm.
uh, animated production.
Yeah.
But I think for and it's not for every show for sure, but the
Mhm.
type of show like Wings of Fire, like what we were doing, where it's like sort of like kind of a little bit more on the realistic sort of cinematography.
Yeah.
And I think this process it's really great because you're able to find stuff that you wouldn't have found if you were just using your shortcuts of of shots that you have in your brain from
Mhm.
storyboarding, because we all have like our little shortcuts of like, oh, this is my wide shot, my medium, or so and so. Whereas
Yeah.
whereas with 3D, you can just drop in the camera and you of course you thumbnail out like how you see it playing out. But then when you drop the camera in, you could see like, okay, this is my thumbnail, but in the actual 3D space, this is like
Mhm.
way better shot than my what my shitty thumbnail was, just because you're
Mhm.
actually in that 3D space. Um, I don't know if I did I answer your question or I veer off very far.
Yeah, no, I think that's
Um,
great. I think that's like a great I think also I wasn't like super clear with the way I like formulated my question and because I remember you were talking about how when Disney bought the Star Wars franchise and basically kind of took over Lucas, like there was a moment when you guys had to transition back to 2D boards.
oh, right.
And I don't
Yes.
know if you want to talk about it or not, or like if that's interesting too.
Um,
We
that's
don't.
that's kind of traumatic time in my life. But yeah, no, it was so when Disney took over Lucasfilm, we for a minute there we went to, they were like, you got to do it the way all our other productions do it, right?
Hmm.
And so, Daddy Daddy Warbucks Lucas wasn't holding the purse strings anymore. So the budget wasn't the same as what it was on the previous sort of Clone Wars um,
Hmm.
uh, episodes or seasons. And so we were doing it in Storyboard Pro, and we were making it work. We were
Hmm.
definitely making it work. And um, but then at a certain point, some of the artists that had worked on the original on the earlier Clone Wars stuff um, took it upon themselves to work with some of the technical directors to help bring ZViz is the name of the proprietary software, bring
Hmm.
ZViz back. And
Hmm.
so and so after a while, after about I think about a season and a half of doing it. It was on Rebels too, on
Hmm.
Star Wars Rebels. The first season was done pretty much all in in Storyboard Pro. I was actually not there during that first season.
Mm,
I was working in story at Paramount for that year. And
mm,
then, but then for the second season, about halfway through the second season, we started experimenting with going back to ZViz and using the
mm.
3D software again. And, yeah, I think it was like for some of the artists who got hired on, um, to do the 2D, the Toon Boom, style,
Mm.
some of them left, to be honest, because I think they probably were like, well, I didn't sign up for this 3D stuff,
Yeah.
right? Which is totally understandable. Um, but then, a lot of the artists that had been there from before and kind of knew what it was all about, we stuck around and like ended
Mm,
up, doing like the last season of the Clone Wars in ZViz, and
mm.
they're using it to this day. But yeah,
So
I mean,
it was just like a short moment when it was just like maybe Toon Boom Storyboard Pro, and then
right,
yeah.
right, and then we went right back to it. I mean, I think it was fun. I had a lot of fun. It was like kind of refreshing. I was like, oh, I get to draw these Star Wars characters.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there's like certain things that like when you do it in 3D, especially with working with an overseas studio, the level of quality is just way better if you do it in 3D.
Mm,
Like flight shots, for example, because there's a lot of
mm-hmm,
like dog fights and all that kind of stuff in Star Wars, right?
mm-hmm,
And we would send stuff over with Toon Boom, and it would look great in the boards, and then you would get
mm-hmm.
stuff coming back from overseas and just be like, oh my god, it looks so bad, because it just didn't translate.
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
when we did it in 3D, we basically just animated the shots, like the
yeah.
spaceship shots. And so the thing about that was, I mean, we didn't, go full animation, but it was laid out in a way where like it was pretty clear on what they needed to do. And so
Right,
when we would get the stuff back, it would look, because they had such a better starting point, you
right.
know, it ended up looking really, really good. So even with like on the early days when we were kind of like in between Storyboard Pro and ZViz, we would
Mm.
kind of like be like, okay, do the episode can be done in Storyboard Pro, but like, oh, here's this like intense like dog fight spaceship sequence. Let's do that in 3D.
Mhm.
We'll do that. Just do that one in 3D, because
Oh, okay. Hmm.
that's the one
Yeah.
it's gonna matter more, you know.
So you had to pick your battles.
Yes. Exactly. So,
Wow, that's so cool. So you've also uh done storyboards and then directing and then supervising directing.
mhm.
And I kind of want to know for you kind of what was the experience on each of these different roles and kind of what's the like pluses and minuses for each of the roles.
Okay. So I guess I'll start with, storyboarding is
Mm-hmm.
it's great. You get your own little sequence, work with the director, and you know, um, and it's great because you can kind of just go into your own little cave a little bit and
Mm-hmm.
and focus on your sequence and make it as good as you can. And then with like episodic directing, excuse me if you heard that scene. With episodic directing, I had on Gremlins, I had like 4 artists per team, and
Oh yeah.
and yeah, I mean it was it was great because it's like, you're trying to you know, uh, communicate your vision of what you want your episode to be. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, you're trying to give your artists enough creative freedom to be able to take ownership of their sequences and actually,
Mm-hmm.
push it to that next level. And on Gremlins, I actually sort of introduced sort of the Blender 3D storyboarding technique to my
Mm-hmm.
team. And, with my team, I was like, because it was like it was a Storyboard Pro show.
Mm-hmm.
But part of the thing agreement I made with the producer when I came on was like, hey, I'd like to try to work in Blender on this. And they were like, cool. And so with my team, um, I like I gave them the option to use Blender, and I just said, hey,
Mm-hmm.
just bear with me for this first episode, and like I kind of like trained them and like sort of asked that they just do one sequence in Storyboard Pro, right? And then from
Yeah.
there, they could like decide whether they wanted to continue with it or work with like a hybrid version of it or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think by the end of it, like, I think like one artist like took it on like completely. Uh, and then most artists worked with a hybrid version of it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They still worked with Storyboard Pro, but we're using Blender to, do a lot of their staging and figuring out a lot of their shots and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the episodic directing, it was great because it was like, working on that, one episode with your team and, um, doing research together, trying to find like a lot of it is like, trying to keep the morale high and inspiring people to like, push the episode to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And then, yeah. And then supervising, directing. It's a lot of that, but it's like, yeah, it's just a bigger level where you're like, you're like hiring people. You're
Mm-hmm.
like, there's a lot more communication that has to happen between departments that you kind of have to
Mm-hmm.
oversee and make sure that, I felt like a big part of it was just, making sure that, my teams, and my directors had everything that they needed to do the best job that they could do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think the part of it I wasn't, that probably was the newest thing for me was not just managing downward. I don't know if that's a good word to use, but to my
Mm-hmm.
crew, but like managing laterally, like managing to producers and managing
Mm-hmm.
to other departments, and like that whole aspect of it was something that kind of was like caught me off guard a little bit. Like, oh yeah,
Oh, I
I
see.
have to like,
Interesting.
I have to, not only, so I was just, I'm just so used to like, I was just so used to just worrying about the story department, right? Just worried about
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
crew and and then all of a sudden, once you become a supervising director, you're in charge of communicating the needs and making sure that your story crew has stuff, but also making sure that, you're not infringing on another department by the things that you're asking for, right? And working
Right.
very closely with like your producers to make sure that, this thing is run smoothly, and to make sure it runs smoothly it's not all about just your department, right? It's about
Mm-hmm.
how your
Mm-hmm.
department works with the other departments, so that was like kind of a big learning experience for me, which was really fun. Um,
Yeah, that's the thing that's kind of like really exciting to hear because it's like for, like when you don't step into these roles, you don't really know what it's like
mhm,
to handle those roles. And I feel like, I don't know, sometimes like a lot of my peers, we're like kind of like career hungry and we're like, okay, I've been a director for a year, like now it's time to be a supervising director. And I'm like, I wonder like what would be
Right,
what would
right.
be your advice to someone that's kind of like looking into like moving up from director to supervising director? Because it's what would be the things that you would be like, oh, this is what I would be looking out for, or like,
Hmm. As far as like,
as far as just like things that I don't know, maybe things that you wish you knew, or like I don't know, like communication tips, or like just any kind of like I guess advice you would give to someone who's about to step in the supervising director role for the first time.
oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's all about, a lot of it is about communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Communicating and like, and really like you're basically, I feel like what, to me, what makes it is what would make a good supervising director, and this is just from my experience on one show, but I feel like you're really, if you're doing your job well, things are going smoothly, right? And people
Mm-hmm.
probably won't know that you're doing a good job, because I feel like your job is to like look out for things that are going, being proactive and stopping blowups from happening before they can. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
being proactive and seeing like, okay, if we don't, change course now, it's going to be a little bit painful now, but it's going to save us in the end if we make this change, right? And being
Mm-hmm.
aware of like seeing the production globally in that way, because once especially in animation, like once you're to the point where the shit is hitting the fan, it's almost kind of too late,
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think a big part of it is like, number one, and communication goes a long way with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with creatives, it's very easy for us to like go into our like little caves and just kind of like want to make beautiful art and like shut the world out. But
Mm-hmm.
but as a supervising director, you can't do that. You have to be the one that like is seeing it from like a bird's eye view, and like, making those tough calls, that might not, you know,
Yeah.
be what your episodic director may want, you know. But part of it too is being able to communicate with your episodic and with whoever you're dealing with, and communicating them in a way that they can understand, like, look, it's not to be mean or whatever, it's for the good of the show. And I think if you're
Yeah.
able to communicate that, people are totally will be on board. And like, I think that's what makes a good, you know, supervising director too, is like being able to communicate those things in a way that keeps everybody on the same page and keeps everybody, you know, engaged and inspired,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
but also like being able to like communicate those harsh truths when they need to be, you know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, because you can't have everything, and sometimes it's like, and a lot of it is working with production,
Yeah.
and and you know sort of working with production, and sort of setting yourself up for success, like if you are proactive and like uh go out of your way to make it easier for another department, right? So like, say
Mm-hmm.
editorial, for example, right? Like, making it a habit of your crew to like, hey, get stuff in early to editorial, right? If you
Right.
get stuff
Mm-hmm.
in early to editorial, there's gonna come a time when you're gonna need more time, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna need more time, and if you foster this relationship, this positive, healthy relationship with this other department, when it comes time that they need you, I mean, that you need them to like, hey, can I get a little bit more time? Can I, they're going to be willing to help you out because you've been helping them out
Right.
previously, right? As opposed to, um, I've seen situations where people are like trying to hold on to their stuff, and it's like almost like it becomes like a combative sort of relationship where
Right.
editorials like now that and now because the stuff is always coming in late because the the artist wants to or the director wants to wants everything to be you know up to a certain standard, and so everything is coming in late. Now
Mhm.
you're putting production and editorial into a position where now they have to protect themselves, right?
Right. Yes.
So now they have to protect themselves from them getting overworked, from them having
Mhm.
to work late into the hours because they got, everything dog piled onto them at the last minute, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and and it's just not, it doesn't foster a very good working environment for anyone. So I feel like, as a supervising director, that's kind of that's one example of some of the things that I kind of like keep an eye on and make sure that that, you know,
Yeah.
everybody, that we're all sort of like, working together in harmony to make this thing. Because I feel like that, once relationships get toxic, it's
Yes.
really hard to come back from them.
That's true. Yeah. That's very true. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. That's really good advice. Wow, that was really great. I think that's great insight, and I think it's a good point for us to kind of jump into some questions from the fans of the show.
okay.
Oh yeah, so from our patron Joe Benson,
Uh-huh.
he asked, well, since you're around the corner and down the street from Disney, what Marvel character you'd like to make a movie or a show of? And if not Marvel, DC.
Oh,
So,
wow. That's a
mhm.
well, since I'm
Blue
working,
sky, just dream.
or since I'm working at Warner Brothers, maybe it should be a DC character.
Yeah.
Uh, let's see. A superhero character, huh? Hmm.
Yeah, I guess Marvel or DC, I
Marvel or
guess.
DC? I mean, I always like the more obscure
Mm.
characters. I'm loving Sandman on Netflix. Oh my God. That
Oh
was
yeah?
that was something that I was like, why hasn't somebody done that? And I'm like, oh shit, they did it, and it's really good. Um, what would be so like a comic book character?
Yeah, I guess
Uh,
Marvel or DC or like kind of like what you yeah, just something like you would be. Like is there like an IP character that you would be like really excited to like pitch or like work on, I guess?
man, I don't know. Superhero stuff, kind of so much superhero stuff out there. No, can I say no?
Yeah, yeah, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. So funny. Yeah, honestly, I'm kind of the same when it comes to like Marvel or like DC. I'm like, I'm not very well versed in any of those, and I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
I like the IP themselves are not usually not very interesting. The moment I get interested is when the characters are like have a spark of, or I don't know. I
Mm.
saw the like Doctor Strange movie in the multiverse, and I was like, that is so fun. Like that's more like it's more like what a director does with the IP that kind of gets me excited rather than the IP itself.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up, when I grew up, I was like a big X-Men fan, but I was like, God, there's so much of that has been done already.
Yeah.
If I think back to like I liked Long Shot. I don't know if you even know this character.
Long shot. Let me check.
And I don't know. I kind of like his character because he's like, his superpower is kind of like not that super. It's basically luck. Like luck
That's
is
so.
like is his superpower. And I don't know. I feel like there's something kind of interesting there because it's not like Aquaman or fucking Superman. You know,
Yeah.
it's like you could fly and punch everything. It's like I don't know. I'm kind of I feel like so much. There's just so much of that, and so many people that do it so well. That's
Yeah.
just not in my. I'm more. I like. Yeah. I'm more into like. I think. Well, actually, take that back. I think I might actually like to do. Uh, see, this is characters. There's way too. There's so much of it already, but like the Batman stuff. Like I'm really into like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
detective
Yeah.
stories. You know,
Mhm. Mhm.
whodunits and that kind of thing. So I mean, I would be interested in doing something like that with like in that universe, but with less of the, you
Of
know,
the like gritty, like it's my city.
right, and like less of the superhero-y stuff and more of the like detective sort of story stuff, like the, you know,
Mm.
making it like a Columbo episode or something, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, Batman, yeah. There's been so
there's
much
there's
Batman
a
that
couple
they
there's a
had to cut some Batman.
I know I know I know.
Wow, that's so funny. Another question from one of our patron, a brother to drummer,
Uh,
asked, did you have any specific moments working on your shows where you said, wow, I can't believe I got to do this?
well, Wings of Fire was really like that, you know. I felt like it was kind of a dream job before it got cut. But
I know. Yeah.
um it
Yeah,
was
well, not Wallow, but
right. Yeah. It was kind of the perfect storm there for a minute. Also I'd say back but you know, this was way back in the day, but when I worked on the Sprite Voltron commercial series. It was pretty awesome at the time. I was pretty, you know, I was a much younger, but it was like I've always been a huge Voltron fan, and then it like coupled it with like all these like hip hop legends that I was a fan
Oh,
of, with like you know, yeah, comment,
that
yeah,
is,
it had all these like yeah, these really great like rappers and stuff. So at the time, I was like, I couldn't believe I was working on that. I was like, wow, this is really cool. Voltron
yeah.
and, you know, and, um, the music that I was listening to at the time, the artists that I was fans of. And then Star Wars. Yeah, Star Wars is stuff, you know, I worked on, that's the thing. Okay. So Star Wars has to be at the top of the list. Like I grew up loving Star Wars, and then I'd worked on it for so long that I think now it's like become, you know, and Lucasfilm was kind of like family, and sometimes you can kind of, you know, take things for granted a little bit, you know,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, I
But
know what you mean.
yeah, but definitely like you know, it really shaped my filmmaking, you know, to this
Hmm.
day. Um, and yeah, yeah, when, you know, just every now and then I'd like pinch myself like, wow, I can't believe I'm working on this. Yeah. Star Wars got to be up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A final question from one of our Twitter followers, at Dead Battery with the E is a three. How much reference do you consume to board and direct for action shows like Clone Wars, Bad Batch, and Rebels?
How much reference? A ton of it. Like yeah, every episode that I work on, you know, that the team worked on, there's always, you know, that time in the beginning where you just got the script and you're going through, and you know, even get notes from your director. A lot of times a lot of times they'll even tell you to reference a certain movie,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for inspiration, you know, and it might be the inspiration might be, you know, for character stuff. It might be for
Mm-hmm.
like cinematography and shots, um, for action choreography. You know, a lot of times, you know, especially for action. like fights and car chase, like whatever. It's like it's been done and it's on YouTube. So, and a lot of it is like the way that, not that you want to go in and just like copy something, like, because that's no fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you just don't want to plagiarize. But it's like, finding something to add to your recipe to make you know, your, your dish unique, your sequence unique. But starting with like, okay, this is the cream of the crop for myself on like what a car chase should be, right? So I'll go find
Mm.
that and then, find the top three and then see like, okay, maybe use a piece from this, a piece from that. And then as you start building it, it takes its own shape and it becomes its own thing. But yeah, I mean, reference and inspiration is paramount. I feel like anybody who says they don't do that, they're not telling the truth.
Yeah, I agree. I
you
feel
know,
like you have to. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I 100%. It's
yeah,
like even sometimes with my friends, we have like a little like chat where like we're working on a sequence, even if we're not on the same shows, like
hmm
we'll be like, hey guys, you have good references for like those specific kind of scenes, and then we have our little brain trust that's like, oh, have you thought about this movie or this animation or this commercial? And then we like,
yeah,
nice, nice. Now I have like a lot of material to sift through really fast.
right, right. And I think the other thing too is that like just because you're working like on an animated show doesn't mean that you need to go to animation for reference, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
like you can spread that net really, really wide. And I think it makes for a much more interesting scene sometimes, the further out you go.
Yeah.
Um, it's like, yeah, it's like, doing the Google search and not taking the first page, not taking the, not
Yeah.
taking,
Yeah.
you want to find it on page 3 or 4, not,
Yeah. 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 Perfect.
so,
Oh, that's great. I'm
yeah.
gonna ask you a quick question. How do you deal with creative block when it strikes?
How do I deal with creative block when it strikes?
Your personal
I just keep
way.
drawing.
You push through
I
it?
just push. That's the only thing you can do. I feel like, I mean, sometimes it's good to step away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good to step away and like, you know, get something to drink or eat or, go for a run and go outside, take a walk or whatever. But 9 times out of 10, for myself at least, I feel like I just need to like keep pushing through. Because for me, the creative block usually comes when I've had a bit of a lull. It's like
Mm,
for me, the creative block comes in the starting of the
I
thing,
see.
and it
Mm-hmm.
takes me a little while to get the momentum going. And
Yeah.
so for me, the only way to get through that is just to get through it, and just
Yeah.
draw, a bunch of things that don't work, until something does. And then when,
Yeah.
when that thing does, when it finally hits, then it's like, oh, okay. And then everything becomes clear. But I would never have gotten there if I just didn't just keep kind of pushing through it, and being
Yeah.
and being okay with I think with the creative block thing too for me is like being okay with the idea that you're gonna have some shitty ideas, you're gonna,
Yeah.
and it doesn't mean that that's ultimately what you're gonna end up putting out there. It's just a part of the process of getting there, you know.
Yeah. Yep.
Sometimes you take a
Mm-hmm.
couple wrong turns, but eventually you find the path. Um,
I
yeah,
love it.
yeah.
That's great.
Get the get
Great.
get the bad ones out the way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like it's funny because depending on the moments that there's a creative block happening, it depends on which strategy I'm gonna pick. But most of the time, I think you're right. Like like just writing down all the shit ideas or like just doodling them, and then you're like, okay, for some reason, it's really crazy. It's like when it's in your head, it won't leave your head, but if you do put it on paper,
Mm-hmm.
then it is gone from your head, and you can like, you're like, oh, I am free from this bad idea. I could like come up with maybe another bad idea, but at
Right,
least a different one.
right, right, right. And sometimes that bad idea is not that bad
Yeah.
in context, right? Like sometimes it's a bad idea by itself, right?
Yeah.
And then you come up with some other ideas, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, that shitty idea actually will work now
Mm-hmm.
when combined with this other better idea. It's like you're just giving yourself stuff to play with, to like match and kind of like make into a good idea. I'm not one of those guys because I've worked with those guys that are like that just sit down and like look at the page for an hour and then just start drawing, and it's like it's awesome. Like I'm not that guy.
What?
I'm not
What?
I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not that guy. I'm the guy that like sits there and like scribble, 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 erase, 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 scribble, 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 until finally, painfully it comes it rounds into shape, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah,
Yeah. Relatable.
right, right.
Well, I think, that was a great episode, and that will be the end of this creative block. Vaughn, thanks for being my guest and sharing your story. And thanks to your listeners. Follow us on Twitter. It's at Creative Block, creative without the vowels, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask your guests. Huge thanks for editor Clemens for editing the podcast and Malik for helping us produce the show. If you love our show, then support us on Patreon. Becoming a patron gets you early access to interviews as well as bonus episodes. Click the link in the description of this episode. I've been your host, V. Keep being creative, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for having me.